Okay, we're ready to go.
Excellent. Welcome everyone to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Committee meeting on January 18th, 2022. Welcome everyone. We'll call this meeting to order and see if we can jump in here. I think I've got a slide I can read to help clarify or instruction. Perfect. Zoom call tips. Please mute your audio when not speaking. Use only one source of audio, computer or phone. Do not put your phone on hold. Submit questions in the chat box when possible. To request the floor, please use raise your hand feature in the Zoom and wait to be acknowledged before proceeding. To make a motion, make sure you state your name before making a first or second motion. Please keep your points clear and concise. And we'll be streaming on YouTube at this particular meeting, just to address that. And let's jump into introductions. And we'll start with our lovely vice chair, Erin.
Good evening, everyone. Erin Barbie, Planning Commission.
Commissioner Gaston.
Melissa Gaston, Planning Commission.
Commissioner Harvey.
RJ Harvey, Planning Commission.
Commissioner Kelly.
Hey, Kelly, Planning Commission.
Commissioner Russell.
Will Russell, Planning Commission.
And Elizabeth has a tendency to sneak in just at this point. Has she joined us? Does anyone see?
Not
Not
yet.
at this point. We'll see if we get her. And I am Philip Gussman, chair of the Planning Committee. And looking forward to hearing from our wonderful staff partners. If you guys can kind of jump in. I don't have a good list of you guys. You moved around a little.
Kathy Cornett, planning staff.
Alicia Osborne, planning staff.
Welcome, Elise.
Gretchen Flores, planning staff.
Alberto Gonzalez, Planning Staff.
Candace Roy, planning staff.
Caroline Sawyer, Mecklenburg County.
And I think that's it. Nice tight group of 12 of us here. Excellent. All right. First up, we've got the mandatory referrals. We've got a nice, a few in the east and one on the west. So let's take a look. I'll go ahead and put it out. First of all, if any of the commissioners has specific questions on anything they'd like to pull out. Looking for hands in case there's something I'm missing. Well, Erin had a good topic on the pre-meeting. We'll bring that up at a later date when we can bring some additional staff resources to bear. And if nobody has any that they'd like to pull out or any questions at this point, I'm looking for a motion if anyone has one.
This is Commissioner Barbie. I'll be happy to make a motion. So the Planning Committee reviewed the mandatory referral reports 22-01, 22-02, 22-03, 22-04 on January 18, 2022, and we have no additional comments for the submitting agencies.
Do we have a second?
Commissioner Kelly, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. As motioned by Barbie, seconded by Kelly. Let's run through the roll call. Commissioner Gaston.
Yes.
Commissioner Harvey.
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly.
Yes.
Commissioner Russell.
Yes.
And Commissioner Barbie.
Yes.
Vice Chair. And the chair votes aye as well, unanimous 6-0. Still don't see Elizabeth. And that passes 6-0, all the current mandatory referrals. Next up, the more exciting bit. Haven't had a good chance to dive into the updated map yet, but staff, what have you got for us on the CLT future implementation?
Yeah, thanks very much. If you could, yeah, there you go. Thank you, Gretchen. So this is basically a similar presentation to what
I
you
believe
had
it's
as a
Kathy,
whole.
right?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're on mute. Or you don't look like you're on mute, but
We
I don't
can
hear
hear,
you.
we can hear her.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah, is it good?
I don't think our chair can hear you.
Adjust my setting.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me, but not her?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh,
Really strange. I
yeah, I'm not muted.
hear you just barely. Let me see something. Hold on.
Kathy, we hear you just fine and we hear Philip just fine as well.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. So it's very similar to the presentation that we heard at the January 10th full commission meeting, diving into a little bit more detail on some of the changes and revisions to the policy map. And also it's the same presentation that was given to council a week or so ago. So we'll talk about a summary of engagement window 2, and then again, get into a little more detail on revisions to the draft policy map, and then we'll talk about next steps in the schedule. Next slide, please. Go ahead to the next one. Thank you. So I know you all have heard this many times before, but phase 2 was introduced on October 13th. With 2 introductory meetings that were live streamed. There were 34 hours of community conversations that were virtual, and then there was, excuse me, another 40 hours of in-person office hours. Excuse me, we received over 1,000 comments that we recorded in a couple of ways. They were on the map that's online and can be viewed that way. And then additionally, there were comments that were recorded in a matrix. And we have been responding to those comments as we can. So some of them were dependent on revisions and other things. So we have reviewed all the comments and are addressing them as we go along. Next slide, please. So I know we discussed this as a full commission too, but really 3 major themes have bubbled to the top throughout the process. And those revolve around commercial, neighborhood 2, and manufacturing and logistics. So as part of the community conversations, we asked some targeted questions around those 3 place types. And you can see by the pie charts, you know, what the feelings were around those different topic areas. Next slide, please. And so key takeaways from that is really continued interest in preservation of historic districts, parks and greenways, and existing neighborhoods and large campuses. Again, just a desire for focusing density based on infrastructures and, you know, really proximity to transportation alternatives, reducing the size of manufacturing and logistics in order to buffer neighborhoods from these more intense place types. And then there was really a desire too that we heard throughout for commercial areas being able to, over the horizon period of the plan, being able to transition into neighborhood centers. And then identifying where manufacturing and logistics, where that really isn't maybe the future based on kind of trends today for that particular place types, and where it should be allowed to kind of transition into innovation and mixed use, where that's more realistic and where each of those are more valuable. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So let's dive into the revisions, and they fall into really 2 like major categories: technical revisions. Now, I would say that both of them really were, one says community driven and one says technical, but really both of them revolve around the work that we have done with the community and the engagement. And that's a large part of any type of plan that we ever do, is hearing from the community. And that really helps us. We introduce a draft, and then that helps us to refine that as we go along. So technical revisions resulted from inconsistencies that we heard, that we noticed, I would guess you would say, based on conversations we were having with the community, interdepartmental staff, and also other data corrections and updates that we made. And then community-driven revisions really were more targeted to the local knowledge and place type preferences to what we were hearing from the community. Next slide, please. So let's look a little bit more in detail at what some of those technical changes are. Next slide, sorry. And so zoning has always been a very important piece. It was a very important piece in the initial base map. And so we revisited how a few districts were translated. And that's part of what we call our zoning crosswalk. So that's one thing that we did. And also we updated the rezoning information to the most recent rezoning. So that was from November, I believe, and updated place types with that data. So those were two big technical changes. Next slide, please. And then another was absorbing utility sites into their surrounding place type, rather than initially in the first draft, they were identified as manufacturing and logistics. So we know that utilities happen all over in order to support the uses around them. And it was causing some confusion with the community when they were seeing these manufacturing and logistics place types within their community and kind of not knowing what exactly that meant. So because they're supporting that particular place type, we've gone ahead and absorbed them into whatever location they are in. And then also there were some instances where there were standalone parcels or very small clusters of parcels that kind of were standing out amidst a larger place type. So place types, while you can drill down on the parcel level, they're not really intended to be applied that way. They're intended to be applied more on the block level. But this isn't an imperfect methodology. So there were some instances where there were parcels or very small clusters that were showing up as something different. So we went back and refined the methodology to absorb those into the surrounding place type. Next slide, please. You can go on to the next slide.
Kathy, I can hear you, but you seem frozen. Can you see my screen? There you go.
I'm sorry, I guess my internet froze. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more in detail about community-driven changes to the methodology and to the map. So I'll walk through a little bit more detail from what we heard last week at the commission meeting. So one area of concern was over the preservation of historic districts. So historic districts, the regulations and the district boundaries and all those things are not affected by place types, and they really are kind of like the overarching regulatory component in some instances, and none of that really changes. But there were places where the place type was changed from what the existing condition was to a different place type. And that was brought to our attention. And so we've gone back and revised the methodology so that the place types within districts match the existing condition. So that's one change that we made. Next slide, please. Another was, I mentioned earlier, there's a desire to protect open spaces rather than in some cases designating them within other place types. So if it's a neighborhood level park, that is considered part of the place type that it is within. And we had the same approach towards greenways. We've gone back and revised 5 acre or more publicly owned greenways and designated those as parks and preserves. Next slide, please. And there was also a strong desire to leverage existing infrastructure and also areas within downtown that uptown that those should be able to support increases in density. So in that instance, we've also increased density where it occurred uptown from N1 to N2 if it was outside of a historic district. Next slide, please. So similarly, there was also a strong desire to transition N1 to N2, especially where it was located near major transportation corridors. So in these instances, we've transitioned N1 to N2 in some locations where they have immediate proximity to high capacity transit stations. Next slide, please. There was also concern or a desire to separate large campus uses from surrounding neighborhoods. So there was concern about what does that transition look like. And so we went back and we looked at what the thresholds were for campus and revised them. And actually, this made it more consistent too with the UDO and the zoning component of the UDO. So we've also made an adjustment in the campus designation as well. So it's basically larger campuses for hospitals and schools and churches. So smaller schools and churches could be part of their surrounding place type. Next slide, please. Also, there was a desire from the community. We heard over and over again the ability, excuse me, to allow commercial uses to translate over time into neighborhood centers where that was appropriate. So in these instances, we went back and had to kind of target these additional neighborhood centers, and we're able to do that based on acreage thresholds. I think it's a 5 acre threshold, and then proximity to other uses as well. Next slide, please. There was comment around, again, the transition between certain sizes of activity centers adjacent to neighborhoods and how that transition happened. So we right-sized those activity centers where they were adjacent to neighborhoods. So in some instances, reducing the size of the center to either a neighborhood center or maybe to commercial, or even in some instances, N2, in order to provide a better transition. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned this earlier that there was a strong desire to preserve and expand manufacturing and logistics in locations where those were viable uses, I guess you could say, and then determining where are areas that based on square footage or loading docks or floor plate or other sort of issues where existing manufacturing and logistics really doesn't suit where the market is today, and allowing those to transition to innovation mixed use. So we used from economic planning systems, our consultant that has been working on a variety of different economic analyses and fiscal impact analyses as part of this project. They took a look at where manufacturing and logistics today really fit kind of where the market is today, And we're able to identify those and preserve those as part of the place type, and then allow other ones to transition to innovation mixed use. Next slide, please. And then finally, there were comments from both the community and the airport about not allowing new residential near, in proximity to the airport. So basically, we interpreted this as within the airport noise overlay. So there was no, we revised the methodology to ensure that there is not additional neighborhood 1 and 2 in the airport noise overlay district, and then recognizing that airport owned property should be designated as manufacturing and logistics. So we worked with, this is both a comment from the community, and then we worked with the airport to kind of make those adjustments. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, the second draft of the policy map was released today, and you should have received an email about that with a link. It's the same link. Next week, we begin 3-day listening sessions with our staff. So if there are constituents that you are hearing from that have questions or concerns or need clarification or whatever the case may be, they are welcome to sign up for half-hour listening sessions with staff, and we have links where they can do that. And then next month, we'll begin the community conversations, which are larger conversations as we did in phase 2 with larger groups. And we'll have several opportunities for that. And that the comment period will run through February 4th. And then there will be a city council public comment session on the 14th. Next slide, please. And as far as the adoption schedule goes, we're here tonight with you to review, to kind of introduce the second draft and review with you what the revisions, major revisions were to that draft. We'll go back to Transportation and Planning Committee on Monday, and then we'll provide you with, as the larger commission, the full commission, with an update on the 7th. The final recommended policy map will be released on the 21st. We'll ask this group for a recommendation on the 22nd of February, and then we will ask City Council for action on the 28th. Next step, please. Next slide, please. And then there are a variety of ways, as always, to stay connected with us, following us on social media and visiting our website. And then obviously we have, the email opportunities as well. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
You have one hand up from Will.
Yes. Can you go back to the community-driven changes slide? I had a question about one of the comments that was placed up. Keep going. Go forward. Go forward again. Keep going. One more. One more. Next one. I don't see it. There we go. So in this purple and this kind of fuchsia colored thought bubble, you've got limit commercial would also help or auto-oriented uses. That one is a little concerning to me, but I want to understand what exactly that meant and what did staff take from that particular comment.
Yeah, so there was really a strong desire from the community and the comments that we heard to transition uses to be more walkable, period. I mean, I think there's a recognition that we need auto-oriented uses. And to be honest with you, excuse me, the commercial place type really builds that piece into it. But I think there was a strong desire from folks to where appropriate, to allow those uses to transition to more of a neighborhood center type format. And so that is, again, when I talked about how we, tweak the methodology so that locations that met a 5-acre threshold minimum, near certain intersections as areas to target additional neighborhood centers.
Okay, because it seems like to me that this particular comment is linking commercial automatically to auto-oriented use, which I think is wrong for a number of reasons. I think the other part of that is you need to have some viable small commercial within neighborhoods in order to make a place walkable. Because if I'm going to walk, where am I going to walk to? Right? There needs to be a destination. And so,
right.
And
and
again,
so oh, I'm sorry.
no, and I was just going to end with, this is something you're going to hear me say, so write it down, because I'm going to beat this horse to death and then back to life. There needs to be a small development ordinance. There needs to be something that focuses on development on a small scale that completely separates how things are evaluated and then changed to rezone. And that gets to the heart of this. Like, how do you incorporate, like, for lack of a better term, like a bodega or a small coffee shop that would be in a more residential area without zoning it or changing a place type to a more commercialized space? Because I can think of some areas in my neighborhood that would fit this exactly.
Right. And just to be clear that those are allowed in neighborhood center, and that's really what the component of a neighborhood center is to allow those small walk-up retail type uses. So I think that's what you're saying is really the desire of the community, to see more of those, as opposed to the commercial place type really accommodates, gas stations and furniture stores and things like that you really need to drive your car to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we have 2 more hands up, Elizabeth McMillan and then RJ Harvey.
Aaron, can you step in? I still can't hear Kathy, but I can hear
Yes.
y'all.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
So I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but we'll start with you, Commissioner McMillan.
Great, thank you. Do you mind flipping to the slide that talks about the economic impact analysis? And if y'all could refresh my memory, did they present to the plan? Did the consultant that's helping y'all with that present to the planning committee or the full commission?
Matt did his presentation. I remember he and I joined up together to present to the full commission, I believe, and at last month's planning committee.
Okay, I just couldn't keep that straight. I guess, that was, I guess what's kind of the next steps with his work. I feel like what he presented before is they had done an analysis, I believe, on the first map and the proposed map to show, that the changes that were being recommended would be covered by the taxes that were generated. I guess what's kind of the next step in his effort as it's related to this. And then I don't know if you can comment on going forward, how that'll roll into the UDO.
Yeah, so he is doing work with the UDO as well. Now, his presentation schedule for that particular group, I'm not familiar with at this particular time. I don't know, Alicia, maybe you can help me. But he will come back, and we did talk about, I think he's going to come back to the full commission to present kind of an update on his findings. And if I'm mischaracterizing that, Alicia, please let me know.
So you're right, Kathy. It's kind of 2 parts. The work he's doing with the policy map is the fiscal impact analysis, and they have taken the second draft of the map and did a second version of the model runs, the community viz model, and the fiscal impact model, which will give us more information about if this is our growth pattern, how much will it cost us to support this growth from a municipality standpoint. That's the first map, and we'll share first part of the analysis. We'll share that at our next meeting, his findings. The second part is the UDO, which is an economic impact analysis, separate and a different focus. Alberto knows the schedule for that because he's leading that part of the work, but that looks at, based on the recommendations within the Unified Development Ordinance, what are the impacts to cost impacts to proposed regulations. And Alberto, if you want to speak to the schedule of that work.
Sure. Yes, we have actually this week, the second round of focus group meetings on the UDO economic analysis, and those are Thursday and Friday. We had the first round early December. And he's also, Matt Prosser with DPS is also joined by David Green with Perkins and Wills, who's was brought in by CDOT and really looking at the spatial analysis as well. So it's both fiscal and spatial, looking at the UDO. And they'll be presenting this week, Thursday and Friday. And those meetings are by different focus areas. We divided them by place types or building type. And then there'll be by mid-February, have the preliminary summary, and we'll have a kind of like a third round of meetings on that.
Okay. I didn't mean to detract from this discussion to talk about the UDO, but I knew that was probably overlapping. So I appreciate the update there.
Sure.
Commissioner Harvey?
Thank you. Can we go back to the community-driven changes? I think it's either the second or third slide. It's talking about the N1 to N2. I think it's the next one. Yes, can we talk a little bit about this? And this actually, something similar to this just came up in one of our smaller working sessions about what, say, something like this, a change from N1 to N2 could do from a displacement standpoint. Let's say any of the neighborhoods that's here in my district that's on Wilkinson Boulevard or West Boulevard or South in Old Pineville, that increasing this density, of course, would definitely change the character of the neighborhood. So I'd be interested to see, what kind of feedback and or comments were made.
Right, so there was a desire from the community it's really along major transportation corridors, so not within existing single family neighborhoods, but along corridors where there's a direct access to high capacity transit to allow those place types to transition from N1 to N2. So where there were those conditions, we went ahead and made that change in the methodology.
Okay, and then I guess, are we considering, I guess from an equity standpoint and a displacement standpoint, where that would say may not be the case, let's say for many of the neighborhoods, let's say here on West Boulevard, they would definitely be impacted, and a lot of people, of course, could lose their homes if that's the case, because from a developer standpoint, speculation, I'm going to come in and buy these homes because if I hold on to them, I know that I can knock these down and do higher density projects. So I guess that's just.
Yes, certainly it's definitely a balance. And, there's a balance between providing capital investments and multi-mobility options. And, of course, that coupled with other factors can increase pressures for redevelopment in some particular areas. But ultimately, it's the property owner's choice to whether or not they, sell their property or to a developer or whatever the case may be. So there is an equitable growth framework within that's a large component of the comprehensive plan and translates into the policy map. But really, it's allowing for all areas to experience the benefits of growth, and also to sort of spread out some of the challenges of growth as well. So it is a balancing act. So this is really in the I guess in the revisions that we made to the methodology, where we could, we made that balance in a way that meets all of those goals to the best of our ability.
Okay.
If I can add, Kathy, Commissioner, add to that about the anti-displacement.
Please do.
And I understand, I think I understand, Commissioner Harvey, what you're saying, but I think the issue or the concern that you're describing can happen today, absent the policy map. So the question is, what does the policy map do to address that concern, and what other tools do we have that are happening or complementary efforts that are underway to help mitigate those types of concerns around displacement? So one, the policy map and the comprehensive plan identifies populations or areas of vulnerability to displacement, which has not been a layer of data that we've done comprehensively for the city before the comp plan. So that's one. And using that data, we are able to use the policy map to say, how might we map the policies or places that we want to see in our community in light of addressing our areas of need and opportunities for growth? Like, how do we balance all of that? And then that then helps guide investments and decision makings in those particular areas as well. The other part that's outside of the policy map, but complementary to the comprehensive plan, is the neighborhood stabilization work that Housing and Neighborhood Services is leading to develop an anti-displacement strategy. There are a number of tools that the city has that looks at displacement beyond just a land use designation, but how do we provide rental assistance? How do we provide home repair programs? How do we provide capital investments in those areas, and a whole suite of programs that are listed in the comp plan in those strategic areas that need it the most? That's where the combination of the policy map and all those other anti-displacement initiatives work together to address the issue. So just by itself, the policy map won't solve it all, but it does play a key role in establishing the foundation of how do we address the land uses, but it definitely complements and the other anti-displacement initiatives that we're leading citywide to help displacement throughout the community.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Good job, Alicia. Thank you. That's it's important, I think, to remember that we've got a lot of moving parts here, and hopefully we're going to help usher them all into an order that will get the best outcomes across the city. And I can't think of a better person to follow up that question than Peter Kelly.
Thank you, Philip. And RJ and I were talking about this earlier today in the small group meeting. One new idea to throw out to the group is whether there should be at the policy level, a protected neighborhood approach of whether we should designate neighborhoods that we're going to, using the picture on the screen now, those neighborhoods in proximity to whether it be the silver line or the blue line outside of the neighborhood 2 areas, those areas become extremely vulnerable to displacement. We know we have some protected tools in the forthcoming UDO, in particular the RIO, the residential infill, and the cottage court overlay. Those are 2 tools that could be used. But there could be a designation at a policy level that said where those areas would likely be done. And think of it similar to the historical districts. And so going in and saying, these are the areas of the city that the goals of the 2040 plan said that we were going to mitigate the impact of growth on displacement. This is how we would set that as a policy level. Because right now, having something designated negative neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2, neighborhood 1 does not at all protect a neighborhood from displacement. In fact, in proximity to a neighborhood 2, it increases the probability of displacement. And so if we don't acknowledge that in our planning, then we're going to have the unintended outcome that's predictable, which is high levels of displacement in proximity to our major transit lines. And we've had it in the past, we've talked about it. And if we don't put it up at a policy level and rely solely at the zoning level, then we're not really making a policy as a community of saying, these are the areas we want to protect neighborhoods for that we think should remain reasonably affordable. And that can't be done without something beyond what we're calling neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2. And I think it would be, it's what a lot of people in the public to think about affordable housing, that's what they're talking about. How do you protect a neighborhood, whether it be ones that have been lost already to the transformation or areas that are, as RJ would say, close to where the silver line's coming, or even in areas where the blue line is now, but the neighborhoods are just beginning to go through that transition. Are we going to protect them? And without having that at a policy level, it seems like we're not going to make the progress that we aspired to in the 2040 plan.
Thank you for that idea. I guess my only response to that would be to remind the group that this is not the end of the planning effort. The policy map is really getting everyone up to the same level playing field, because today only about a quarter of our community has guidance that builds in transportation and form and from policy level. So it's really, first step is getting everyone to the same level playing field. And the second step is to continue to do area planning immediately after the adoption of the policy map. And I would think that these kind of ideas that you're discussing here really would be at the forefront of those efforts as well.
I believe that could occur at the lower area planning, but I think it's too late. If we don't designate them up front and identify areas and saying, these are the areas in the city that we want to protect, then we're not going to protect any of them. And we can come back in 5 years and say, well, you know, it happened, growth happened, and those neighborhoods in proximity, people got displaced, but that's just the price of growth. Or we could say, as we said in the policy in the 2040 goals, that we want to balance growth with minimizing displacement, and it won't occur unless we designate it. And that's just my personal opinion.
Good point. Any other staff would like to jump in on that particular one? I'm just checking, because I know we've had some nice discussion on that. Okay. Certainly. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised at this point. I unfortunately missed, and will go back and re-listen to some of Kathy's comments earlier, but I've got everything working now. And I think I'm going to generate a question or two in that. I'll be getting back to you, Kathy, on that, but I don't have anything else at this point. If no other comments or question, for the good of the order, I will accept a motion.
Commissioner Kelly, motion to close.
McMillan,
Kelly,
second.
Thank you. Seconded by Macmillan. I think I've got consent with everybody agreeing on that one. So I will give everyone back a good chunk of their evening. We had a couple of good topics come up that we're going to see about bringing back, I would say. But know that we have 1 month on the policy mapping. Look at it, make sure if we have other comments that we get them to staff, and let's make sure we get the best policy map we can start with on this. Thank you, everyone. We
Thank
are
you. Have a good
adjourned.
evening. Bye.